Alright guys, so the US media continues to be overwhelmingly garbage when it comes to their coverage of Israel's genocidal war on the Gaza Strip. And so I got some new examples here for you guys that have been floating around the timeline recently. Obviously, I've talked previously about some of the reports that came out on CNN, for example, and we got an update here that I'll get to in a minute on that. And just the overall Western media bias against Palestinians and for the Israeli government, where they will use terms that are incredibly loaded and visceral, like Israelis were slaughtered on October 7th and they were massacred, but then when it comes to Palestinians, it's overwhelmingly like, well, some mysterious blast or some bullet just, resulted in maybe potentially the deaths of some people, who could say who's really responsible for it at the end of the day. So we've seen the discrepancy between how they talk about Israeli deaths versus Palestinian deaths and just the overwhelming bias within our media ecosystem here. But these articles here take it to an entirely different level. And I'm honestly astounded that this one specifically, and the next one that we're going to talk about, even got past the editors to be able to run this in major media outlets. So this first one was from New York Times columnist Thomas L. Friedman, who many people have described previously as a dumb guy's idea of what a smart guy sounds like. And I think that's a pretty good way to summarize his body of work. So, this is from The Point, Conversations and Insight About the Moment. And its headline is, Understanding the Middle East Through the Animal Kingdom. Through the Animal Kingdom. So, immediately off the bat, we're portraying the Middle East as some sort of like a jungle of animals that can't be analyzed through any sort of like human perspective, right? We're immediately jumping to the animal kingdom. And this is just comical here. The US is like an old lion. We are still the king of the Middle East jungle, more powerful than any single actor, but we have so many scars from so many fights that we just can't show up, roar loudly, and expect that everyone will do what we want or scamper away. We are one tired lion, and that's why other predators are no longer afraid to test us. He says Iran is to geopolitics what a recently discovered species of parasitoid wasp is to nature. So Iran, our global enemy here in the region, we are comparing them to a parasitic wasp. You can look back throughout history, okay, specifically over the last couple hundred years. Usually when we start comparing our enemies to parasites, not really a good foreshadowing for what's to come in the future. He says, what does this parasitoid wasp do? According to Science Daily, so he's appealing now to science journals. The wasp injects its eggs into live caterpillars, and the baby wasp larvae slowly eat the caterpillar from the inside out. And he then compares this to Lebanon and Yemen and Syria and Iraq, saying they're the caterpillars, and then the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and Kataib Hezbollah are the eggs that hatch inside the host of these countries and eat it from the inside out. We have no counter strategy that safely and efficiently kills the wasp without setting fire to the whole jungle. Okay, so this is where we're at right now. This is the kind of analysis that we have, right? To the extent that he talks about U.S. meddling and involvement and warfare and bloodshed of several different Middle Eastern countries, Iraq and Afghanistan, which technically is not in the Middle East, but same point applies, or our actions inside of Syria, or our actions in supporting Israel in their war on the Palestinian people, okay? He talks about all of that history, where the United States has engaged in coups against Iran specifically, for example, but invasions that have led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people for absolutely no justifiable reason whatsoever. Iraq, Afghanistan had nothing to do with 9/11. That was a major justification that Bush gave to go and invade these countries, weapons of mass destruction. We all know the history behind that. And he compares all of that, the decades of U.S. meddling in this region, specifically for the benefit of U.S. geopolitical posturing and power in the region, as well as to the benefit of oil companies and weapons manufacturers. All of that can just be summarized as, we are like a powerful lion. We're the lion. We're the beautiful, powerful lion of this region. And Iran and Hezbollah and the Houthis and all of these different various groups, they're like parasites. They're wasp, insectoid parasites of some sort. Maybe maybe do a little bit deeper analysis here and come to recognize how U.S. actions in this region, as this beautiful lion figure, have maybe contributed towards destabilizing effects that even in many cases empower some of these groups who you are now comparing to insects. Okay, maybe do a little bit of a broader analysis there. But no, this is what we get. I mean, again, guys, comparing the Middle East to the animal kingdom, right? They can't be analyzed through any sort of like real material analysis. No, we have to compare them to subhuman species in order to understand the situation. I mean, it's so grotesque, right? And this one is almost as bad. Maybe it's even worse. I'll let you guys decide. This was posted in the Wall Street Journal opinion section. Welcome to Dearborn, Michigan, America's Jihad capital. They say imams and politicians in the Michigan city side with Hamas against Israel and Iran against the United States. And I saw other articles as well. I think there was one in Chicago because the mayor of Chicago, who's a pretty left-wing guy relative to American politics, and he managed to override a stalemate in the Chicago City Council or whatever that voted for a ceasefire inside of Gaza. And they basically did the same exact kind of headline for Chicago, implying that they are somehow complicit with Hamas or they are, pro-terrorism or something like that. But I mean, this is just, I don't know how you analyze this other than just, it's straight up racism. That's what we're talking about here. And again, I'll link this down below if you want to go read through the entire article. It is paywalled. I use a different site called archive.ph if you guys want to go read the whole thing. But I mean, this is just straight up racism. It's just straight up Islamophobia. You're talking about a city that is incredibly diverse, that does have a significant Muslim population, a city that is overwhelmingly pro-ceasefire, that is pro-Palestinian human rights, that is very critical of Israel, and you're basically just implying what? They're all jihadists. They all want to topple the United States government. They want to, go and join allegiances with Hamas and Iran against the United States and Israel. I mean, it is so lazy and also, again, grotesque, similar to the first headline, right? America's Jihad capital. And if you think that there aren't going to be any tangential outcomes from this, namely like threats and attacks potentially against Muslim Americans in the wake of something like this and this kind of rhetoric that is being used against a predominantly, Muslim community here, I mean, we've all seen what has happened in the past, right? Welcome to Dearborn, America's Jihad capital. And throughout this article, some of the things that they talk about is literally, again, just people who have critiques of Israel or people who are pro-ceasefire. And this is the conflation that Israel has had throughout the entirety of this war. Many Democrats, Republicans have had as well, where it's like, if you dare to criticize Israel at this moment, or you dare to try to call for a ceasefire, then somehow you are enabling Hamas. You are pro-Hamas. You are pro-terrorism. You support every single thing that Hamas did on October 7th, which is just an utterly ridiculous way to analyze the current political situation. And, this also ties in with the struggles that Biden has had trying to, secure some of the Arab American votes that he would need to win a state like Michigan. And so I broke this down. I'm going to do a separate video either later today or tomorrow on Biden's disastrous polling numbers. I mean, historically bad from modern American presidents. And part of the reason why he's struggling significantly in a state like Michigan that he actually won in 2020 by about 154,000 votes, he's struggling because of things like this. I mean, endless support, endless arming of Israel. They're currently working on a bill right now to give them billions and billions of dollars in additional aid on top of the billions that we've already given Israel throughout recent years. And it's totally unquestioned. It's unchecked. There's no oversight for it. No strings attached in any way, shape, or form. And so when you have a community like Dearborn, and this is the mayor of Dearborn here, Abdullah Hamoud, who we had on Breaking Points, and he's done a couple interviews that I'll show you guys here just in a second. But I mean, like, he knows people personally who helped to elect him to get into office within his community in Dearborn. And they have family members who have been killed by Joe Biden's and Israel's war on Gaza. Innocent people, men, women, and children, right? Some of them have entire family sections of their family that have been wiped out. I mean, we've covered the stories of literal entire bloodlines inside of Gaza that have been wiped out, okay? And so he has people in his constituency that have had direct involvement in this, that have family members who are currently being killed and starved by this war. But the idea somehow that, like, they would be critical of Biden, or even maybe not be excited to vote for Biden, is just outlandish to people, right? And so he responded to this headline specifically. saying that it's 2024 and the Wall Street Journal still pushes this type of garbage, reckless, bigoted, Islamophobic. Dearborn is one of the greatest American cities in our nation, fastest growing city in Michigan, home to the #1 travel destination apparently in Greenville Village, the Henry Ford Museum. It's the home of the Ford Motor Company, coffee, food, culture capital of Michigan, among the most diverse cities in Michigan. Do better, and I mean do better, I mean to say the least. I mean this is an absolutely insane headline that you could only really compare to like the early stages after 9/11, when there was such fervor from the American media, elite class in this country to get us into war, regardless of the circumstances, just sort of a bloodlust that we've also seen mirrored since October 7th, both in the US and also in Israel, where it's just like, we don't really care what kind of consequences this has in the long run, both in a foreign policy sense in the countries or the people that we are going around massacring or destabilizing or destroying overseas, but also in a domestic sense, where in the aftermath of 9/11, we had incredible crackdowns with things like the Patriot Act and surveillance of Muslim American communities, which is something Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, recently called for, and I covered on this channel, where she was talking about Gaza ceasefire protesters and says the FBI needs to investigate these people because they're backed by Putin or China or whoever I want them to be backed by in my, nonsense delusional fantasy world that I live in. And so we've seen the consequences of increase in the surveillance state, of the police state, of authoritarian crackdowns on specifically Muslim communities in the wake of situations like this. And I mean, this is just pushing the same exact kind of idea, right? As if like the people of Dearborn are all jihadist terrorists who are just blowing up buildings left and right in Michigan. I mean, where does this come from? Where's the evidence for this? What, because they're critical of Israel? Because they're not happy with Biden and his handling of this situation? I mean, again, it is just purely racist, right? And so now we get to hear from directly from Abdullah here, who's been doing a little media circuit recently. And so let's go ahead and watch this first one, which was on MSNBC, where he talks about how this vote blue no matter who mindset from Democrats and their approach is just not going to be effective in terms of trying to begin the process of winning some of these people back. So let's go ahead and watch him real quick.
You've probably heard, and certainly there have been these voices out there critical of how Arab Americans or Muslim Americans might vote. And they say if Donald Trump does in fact beat Joe Biden in a state like Michigan, that Arabs and Muslims would be blamed for that. I want to give you a chance to respond to that criticism. I know that you were saying it's not right to look at things through electoral politics, but the electoral conversation, the political conversation is happening as a tool against the community right now.
I've never lived in a world where you point at the voters and blame them if the candidate does not win. The candidate needs to self-reflect and look in the mirror, in this case, be it President Biden. The question has to fall squarely on him. What will he do to demonstrate, to rebuild that trust and respect amongst Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, and Democrats across the base, over 80% who support a ceasefire? What will he do to prevent the unraveling of our American democracy, which is the threat that Donald Trump poses? So those questions need to be put back onto the candidate, and no blame should ever be put on a voter or a constituent. We want to go to the polls with hope, inspired, in support of a candidate. This idea that you draw people to the ballot box by getting them to say, I am the lesser of two evils, or out of fear of who might assume the office, that's not as inspirational as one of hope.
I mean, it's a very simple message there, right? And this is something that I talk about all the time, where it's like, yeah, it's on the politician to earn the votes of the voters. But Democrats, liberals, they have the exact opposite mindset, where it's like, if you are not with us 100% and have no critiques of what our current policy agenda is, then you are with Donald Trump. You are basically a Donald Trump supporter. And that's just, at the end of the day, not only is it a stupid approach to politics, instead of trying to go aggressively push forward with a popular economic and foreign policy agenda, not only is it not, a good approach in terms of the political aspects of it, but it's just not going to work, right? And so even if you do agree, which I agree, Donald Trump is worse than Biden on basically every single issue. I could hash it out on detailed different policy disagreements. He's worse by almost every single metric that you want to look at. But that's not how people vote. In order to win as a Democrat, you need to energize people. You need to energize specific key constituencies. In this case, in Michigan, it's the Arab American community. It's also the African American community. It's young people. It's Gen Z people. It's all of these different constituencies that you have to go and earn their votes. To turn around and just say, well, if you don't vote for Biden, then you're basically voting for Trump. That's not going to fucking work. It's not going to be effective, no matter how true you may believe it to be. And so I think that that's a good message there. And it's really the bare minimum. I mean, what are we talking about? Yeah, Joe Biden has to go and earn the votes of the people of Michigan, okay, some of which have literal family members who he has aided and abetted in killing inside of Gaza. And we're having a conversation as if what? They should all just be forced to suck it up, forget your family members that have been killed, forget his atrocious support for a genocide inside of Gaza. No, Trump is bad, so therefore suck it up and vote for him. I mean, you can make a rational argument, again, a case, that Trump is worse than Biden on many of these different issues. But that is not going to be effective in terms of an electoral strategy to try to actually energize people to show up to the polls. I mean, the biggest issue for Biden isn't that people are going to flip to Donald Trump, it's that they'll stay home. It's that they'll, vote for Cornel West or somebody else. That's his biggest issue. And smearing people and shaming people, it's not ever going to be effective. And we also had a follow-up report here that I'll link down below if you guys want to go read it. Following up on that Intercept reporting that I talked about a couple of weeks ago on the CNN, staff basically revolting and saying that their pro-Israel slant amounts to journalistic malpractice. A lot of this is, again, rehashing that Daniel Boguslaw Intercept reporting where he talks about how every single thing that CNN puts out is run through the Jerusalem Bureau inside of Israel. And, they have all of these checks for any sort of Palestinian voice that they would possibly air the opinion of, and has to go through 18 different layers, including potentially IDF censorship directly. But then when it comes to Israeli government statements, they take it at face value. I mean, just incredible bias that is baked within the U.S. media ecosystem, specifically on this issue. And with headlines like the ones we just talked about, it's ramping up to a point of absurdity. I mean, it's ramping up to the point of just being absolutely disgusting and racist. And so to show a counterexample here, to be fair, I have seen some good reporting, right? I use mainstream sources all the time as reference points to talk about in my videos. So there are some good journalists out there. There are some good pieces out there. This one stood out to me. It was a CNN journalist. I believe his name is Jamie Diamond or something. And Jeremy Diamond, and he went out and he basically did this segment where he exposed an IDF lie directly on air. And it was kind of ironic because the chyron here that you can see says IDF shows CNN Hamas tunnel that they claim is underneath a Gaza cemetery. But in the actual video, if you watch it, he asked them, okay, can you show me, because they just flattened this entire cemetery, which is a war crime, by the way, unless there's a direct military objective. And he says, can you show me where the entrance to the tunnel is that you're claiming is in the middle of the cemetery? And the IDF guy comes up and he says, no, I can't show you it. And so then he says, okay, well, how are we supposed to verify this? They ended up giving him some drone footage of where they showed the entrances to the tunnel. And you can see it in the video. They're directly outside of where the IDF claimed that they were, right? They show it right there. So this is a cemetery. This is where the tunnel entrances were. So, it's some examples like that, where there is good, solid journalism going on, where people are willing to confront these authorities, the Biden administration, the Israeli government, under very difficult circumstances, especially if you're embedded with the IDF, with their draconian censorship policies towards Western media outlets. So, there are exceptions to it, but overwhelmingly, the media coverage over the last couple of months since October 7th, and obviously well before that as well, has just been absolutely atrocious.